are for the final presentation of this year's conference. And as I said, we don't technically save the best for the last, but I'd be extremely surprised if people are not totally enjoying what Joe has to bring. You are looking very well dressed today, Joe.
Oh,
You do
thank you,
something on
big
the hill
time.
today?
What's that?
Doing something on the hill or something today?
Got all kinds of things happening per usual.
Per usual. Uh, Joe is, of all the speakers we've brought in this year, Joe is one I've known for, well, I think probably the shortest amount of time. Um, but he brings, oh God, there's so many pieces. We're only going to be able to talk about, I think, one of those pieces today. And it's one that I've been looking for someone to bring like hard science and serious conversation to for years. Um, the theme this year is renaturing ourselves, and we've been looking into that in all kinds of different ways. Um, but frequency and harmonics and ambient energy fields are a massive part of how nature communicates with itself and with each other. And Joe, I think, understands it, and has been working in this field for decades. So I'm not sure, Joe. Do you want to? I'm sure you can do a better job introducing yourself than I can. Are you ready with your slides, and do you have all that
Yeah, I'm
tech?
trying to. I don't know if Gabe. I guess uh, I can either put the slides up or he can.
I don't think Gabe is signed in. It doesn't look like. So
Okay.
if
All right.
you
Let
can do
me.
a screen share, maybe the way to do it.
Okay. Let me figure out. I have the slides up.
There's that little icon in the middle, the green one at the bottom. It says share.
Okay. Bear with me.
Sharing.
Where are you today, by the way? While I'm
I
figuring all
am
this.
in Cape Town, South Africa.
Cape Town, South
Uh,
Africa. The host is disabled screen sharing.
that's you, Shauna.
Yep, it'll pop up and I can allow that. So
Okay,
waiting for that pop up.
Hitting the button a few times. Are you, when I hit share screen, it says host disabled attendee screen sharing.
Oh, there's
Try
Adam
again.
just Davis.
Okay.
Got
So
it?
if I can share, I guess, window. I have it up in a. Um, can you see the? Can you see what I see?
Not yet. No. Can you
Okay.
see what I see?
You see what I
Oh,
see, a boy, a boy.
la da 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 dum. I'll
I'm gonna, I don't know, maybe I'll download this. It's open, but I don't know how to make it.
one thing maybe you can do is if you just email it to Shauna, she may be able to run it for you. She's in a pinch.
Okay,
Can
that'd
do
be
that.
great. I will email it to Shauna. That sounds like a good deal.
Okay. Once you've done that, maybe you can start your introduction while she waits for it to come through and
All
get it
right.
going. Um, yeah, so the general structure here for everyone, I mean, most people have been here in the the previous 11 weeks, but oh, there's Gabe.
There's Gabe. Hey, Gabe, can you email that to Shauna? You there, Gabe? Or what's Shauna's email? I'll try to do it at the same time.
Shauna at bionutrient.org. SHAWNA.
Shauna at Bionutrient.
Or the suspense is building for your I'll have to wait and watch this process happening. No one has any idea what you're about to drop here. Go. Oh, it's gonna be good.
Okay, it's out and about, out and about. All right, let's go ahead and jump. And then, Shauna, whenever you get it, you can start throwing it up. That'd be good juju.
Cool. I'm going to turn my camera and audio off, and I'm going to wait for you to finish your presentation, and then we'll engage in the Q&A. You got
Okay.
an hour plus or minus to do this
All
part.
right. All right.
Okay.
So, thank you, Daniel. By the way, you're a good egg. So
You're
yeah.
amazing.
So my name is Joe Sandri, and yeah, I met Dan through one of. So let me step way back. I work on a variety of projects in the technology world, invention world, and in the environmental science world. I came out of doing work with the Nature Conservancy back in the as late as the late 80s, helping restore a location called Ice Mountain in West Virginia, where there's these ancient ice caves, even on hot days, where there's ancient ferns and mosses and flowers indigenous to northern climes that live around the mouth of those ice caves. I also spent a lot of time with some of the world's largest lumber yards in history in Michigan as a boy, and that caused me to get really interested in where all those trees came from that were cut down and what happened to nature in the context of cutting down those old growth forests. And I'll talk more about that. I later got involved in getting a bachelor's of science in broadcast journalism. I worked as a sports anchor for a CBS television affiliate down in Georgia for a couple of years. And then I went to law school, got a Juris Doctor here in Washington, D.C., and also got a specialty certification from what's called the Institute for Communications Law Studies. I got involved in communications world, both everything from First Amendment law to satellite and wireless systems and that type of realm. And I did that with a large law firm for a while whose motto was serving law through science. We're half PhDs, half attorneys doing all kinds of work nationally and globally with wireless and satellite and wireline systems. And I was later asked in late 1995, right before they signed what was called the Telecommunications Act of 1996, to go with a startup company, which was called WinStar, which I did. So I left the big law firm world and became ultimately the president of something called um, IDT Spectrum, because this company WinStar grew from about 20 people to 5,000 people. Then it blew up in the dot-com boom. It acquired more spectrum licenses than any other entity in the United States by far in terms of pure megahertz. That's how you measure spectrum. And then ultimately got bought out. And then that company ultimately is now owned by Verizon. The majority of Verizon's 5G millimeter wave band spectrum is from that entity. I later, before I left that entity before Verizon bought it, and was co-president of another company called Fiber Tower, which is now a substantial portion of AT&T's 5G millimeter wave band spectrum. I sold that. That was sold in 2018, and at that point, I decided to start thinking about doing a lot of inventions I always was interested in developing, and also in a lot of environmental science work. And so I've been doing that. And what does that mean? So I'll give you a list of entities that have very specific missions in ecosystem restoration, very specific missions in ecosystem restoration, and I'll talk about them at length today. One is the Archangel Ancient Tree Archive. In 2018, I joined their board. We find the oldest and largest trees on planet Earth. We find the oldest and largest trees on planet Earth, and then we legally protect them, and then we climb them and get new growth cutting from them. And using that DNA, we send it to our lab in Michigan. We also have labs in New Zealand and California, and we make 100% lineage clones of those old growth forest trees. And then we propagate, archive, and reforest. Propagate, archive, and reforest with those old growth trees. So the idea is to reforest the planet with those old growth trees, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Another group I'm actually currently president of is the Environmental Health Trust, and I'm on their board as well. And we are very concerned about cell phone addiction and also the radiation that comes off of wireless networks and devices. And we won a federal case about 4 years ago where the FCC and the FDA were essentially what's called remanded by a federal judge and asked to go back and take their 1980s era rules, which haven't been meaningfully changed since the 80s, on the amount of radiation we're allowed to be hit with, the amount of radiation we're allowed to be hit with. And it's terrible. In the United States, the amount of radiation we're allowed to be hit with, including flora and fauna, not just humans, but bees, propagators, which are heavily damaged by this, and your pets, and go down the list, microbes, everything are harmed by that. And so we have a federal case. We're trying to get the FCC and the FDA to comply with that remand. And I'll talk more about that today. There's other groups as well. There's the way I met Dan is I'm president of something called the Friends of the Ecosystem Restoration Movement, Friends of the Ecosystem Restoration Movement. And we think holistically about full-scale ecosystem restoration. So that could be your farms, that could be the old growth forest I was talking about, that could be making sure your environment is not polluted by radiation, but air, soil, and water restoration. Think about organic farms, drinkable rivers, landscapes that were destroyed, sort of like the Dust Bowl type landscapes that were restored. There's one in the Loess Plateau in China. Our visionary at the Friends of the Ecosystem Restoration Movement is a guy named John D. Liu, Liu, John D. Liu, who has for 30 plus years documented successful restorations of degraded landscapes. One's nearly the size of the state of Maryland in the Loess Plateau in China. And if you do an internet search for John D. Liu and ecosystem restoration, his name comes up everywhere. He's probably the most, in terms of Google or ChatGPT, talking about folks who come back to the land and try to restore it. He's one of the prime experts in that area. There's a few other programs I'm involved with, but I'll pipe it down for a little bit and sort of walk through a little bit of the slides, high level. I'm not going to read everything from the slides. You guys can have those for background, but I'll talk to them. So the first thing I want to talk about is in terms of healthy environment infrastructure. What does a healthy environment infrastructure mean and look like? And I'm going to get a little high level and also a little very down the rabbit hole on this subject. So big picture, I think we all know that when we're healthy, we have the bandwidth to think about everything and to enjoy life and the world around us. Same with, any other living creature. So health is wealth. And that's sort of a core premise of healthy environmental infrastructure. So we know this on a personal level. We know that when we look out at a healthy landscape, where we want to go to vacation often is in the beautiful landscapes, national parks, forests, beaches that are clean, not covered with oil slicks or concrete. And we knew that as humans, we know this kind of intuitively. And one way to get to or back to healthy environmental infrastructures is to make sure we want to have systems that address unmet demands out there that are, because we naturally want to be in a healthy environment, but we're often not. What are some examples? Well, one example is we don't have a mobile phone industry that competes on safety. We don't have a mobile phone industry that competes on safety. What does that mean? When you walk into your iPhone store or Verizon or any other store, you don't see a big sign that says, look at our safest network or look at our safest phone. Here's our safest phones and our safest models. You do see that when you walk into a car showroom. There's highway safety rating tests, and insurance rates are much lower for safe cars. And there's a history around that. In the 70s, the auto industry resisted. They didn't want to compete on safety. They didn't want to put in seatbelts. They didn't want to have auto glass. Back then, when there was an accident, there was literal glass that would cut you to shreds. People bled to death, normal, simple 5-mile-an-hour accidents, things that today we have auto glass that doesn't cut you. We have seatbelts, we have airbags, we have crumple zones, so the engine doesn't end up on your lap. We have all kinds of other technologies. Our cars are festooned with technologies where lane change alert systems. So if you're wandering in the wrong lane, that sort of tell you, wait a minute, don't change the lane. We have rear view cameras when we back up, on and on and on. And the auto industry makes a ton of money competing on safety. It makes a ton of money competing on safety. And ultimately now when there's accidents of the type that would have normally killed somebody in the 70s, people walk away from them with nary a scratch. The airbag goes off, everyone's shook it up, and auto fatalities are way down from what they would be but for those safety features. But the auto industry had to be convinced to compete on safety, And Volvo in the 1970s broke from the pack. They put out some advertisements saying they were the safest car. They parked a Volvo in front of the U.S. Congress, saying, "Why doesn't, why should it take an act of Congress to get safe cars?" And then all of a sudden, a week later, there were full page ads from Mercedes talking about that they also have safe technology and they're competing on safety. And then the animal forces of capitalism took over, and they got the auto industry to clean up its own act and compete on safety. And today you don't have to really think about it. They're always competing for more and more safety features. They make money off of it. Back in the 70s, they were arguing when they first were asked to put seatbelts in, as a mandatory thing. They're like, "Oh, you'll put us out of business. That'll be $1.85 per seatbelt. We'll go out of business," which of course was malarkey. It was full blown malarkey. They didn't go out of business. They made money. They just like normal capitalists, they would take the price of the seatbelt that it cost them and add a percentage to that. So they'd make some money off of each seatbelt sold. And they realized, oh, this is a good business. We're competing on safety now instead of resisting. Flash forward to today. Do you see, again, if you go into your mobile phone store, do you see that type of energy around competing on safety? No, you don't. It's artificially suppressed. You would be gravitated to it if you saw a sign that said, "Oh, let's see our safest phone," but you don't. Today, if you go into your phone, if you have an iPhone, if you go into settings and then go into general and then go into legal and regulatory, and then you go into RF exposure, which stands for radio frequency exposure. Again, if you go into settings, settings, general, legal and regulatory, RF exposure, settings, general, legal and regulatory, RF exposure, you'll see a bunch of words. And those words say, oh, the specific absorption rate on your mobile phone is designed to not be over a certain radiation exposure limit as measured 5 millimeters from your body, i.e., they never measure it if it's touching your skin. They measure it away from your body, and they say, "Oh, we meet that standard." Well, of course, one, you've probably never seen that in your phone because I just told you how deeply it's buried. You have to go into settings and general, legal and regulatory, RF exposure. Two, the measurements here in the U.S., at least, that they take are only for 5 millimeters from your body. Finally, so that's not competing on safety because in many other countries, the networks and the phones are required by law to be much less powerful, much less powerful. In Switzerland, the networks are 3% of the power levels of the United States, 3%. In Italy, they're about 10%. Same with India, same with many other countries, including even Russia and China. Well, why is that? Well, in the US, it's cheaper to build fewer towers and turn up the power. It's cheaper to build fewer towers and turn up the power and blast everywhere. That's one reason. And so if we encourage the industry to compete on safety by going into the stores and talking to them, and also helping the regulators push for this. And again, we've won a federal case. The FCC's on remand. They haven't ruled, but we were asking them to update their ancient, outmoded, frankly pathetic laws around that area. So you've got that in terms of competing on safety. There's other areas. Wouldn't it be great if the water that came out of your faucet, if there was competition with the water company to make sure it was clean, so you didn't have to buy bottled water? Wouldn't that be great? 300 years ago, almost every river in the world you could drink from. The rivers were drinkable. People forget that. We have amnesia. We have historic amnesia about how clean everything used to be. Also, another system that meets unmet demand, and I don't know if the slides are still up, but if the slides are still up, I can't see them still up. But another system that meets unmet demand is letting nature do. And if you go back to the slide above, please. If you let help natural systems regenerate and reflourish on their own, Our old growth forests, for example, we're down to about 3% of them in the United States, down to 3%. And there are and there are filters for our air, our water, and our soil. They clean our air, our soil, and water. However, we keep cutting them to make IKEA, to make mulch. And this is happening globally. There's 60,065 known tree species on Earth, according to Cambridge University. There's probably more. We just haven't discovered them all yet. There's probably over 70,000, according to the dendrologists, the tree scientists. But we don't help those natural systems do their own regeneration. Why is that important? Let's say for bionutrient foods. For example, organically, if you just go to a walnut tree, which has the highest protein content of any nut on earth, most walnut trees are organic by nature. They're just out there, and I've got a few in my yard. They're just, I don't put pesticides or herbicides on them. And a food forest of walnuts can generate a lot more protein than even big ag, huge farms that are out there, many thousand-acre farms. Per acre, a walnut grove, a chestnut grove, a full-grown chestnut can feed a family of 4 for a year. You might get tired of chestnuts, but a full-grown chestnut tree can feed a family of 4 for a year. And obviously, back in the day, in the United States, for example, there were throughout the Appalachians and the Blue Ridges, and many other locations throughout North America, there were chestnut trees of great stature and size and age, but we lost them in the chestnut blight. There's a big movement to bring those back, for example. So that's an area where letting nature run its own course to heal and getting out of its way, or helping it in terms of a variety of tools. Another area in going back to telecommunications, addressing the environmental aspects of satellite mega constellations. I'll talk about that a little bit later today. But there are massive networks that make, here in the US, the Verizon, AT&T look tiny, that are being launched right now and that are being deployed. And what are the environmental impacts there? And what does that mean for our health of our food, our soil, our air, our water? Same with our social media. Our social media has been engineered to be addictive. The chemical pharmacy in your brain, the neuropsychologists have been hired by social media companies for decades now, have engineered social media to be addictive. So people are addicted to screens. And the Environmental Health Trust, one of the groups I mentioned I'm involved in, is looking at this in detail. And we've met with some of the state attorney general folks who have been involved in what's called an MDL, or a multi-district litigation, to get rid of highly addictive, designed algorithms in our social media. And this multi-district litigation that 45 of the 50 states are involved in one way or another is all about recognizing that this is wrong. It's sort of like back in the early 1900s when they used to put cocaine in Coca-Cola. They used to put cocaine in Coca-Cola, made it addictive, and they sold more of it. And of course, that was terrible. They used to put heroin in cough syrup in the early 1900s. You can look all this up. Teddy Roosevelt was involved in making those controlled substances and taking them out of our everyday items. But the same chemical reaction that happens in somebody's brain when when there was cocaine in Coca-Cola or heroin in cough syrup, sadly, is the same chemical reaction that's been engineered in these things when you pull up social media. They've made that addictive on purpose, and now there's serious litigation about that, and we're involved in that area as well. And then one thing on this, the last remaining thing on this slide I want to talk about a little bit, is that as a matter of physics, this is something Dan alluded to at the top of the call that I talk about a lot. As a matter of physics, everything that we encounter in our physical world, whether it's liquid or solid, or in an airwave, like a wireless airwave, or something, just the air itself you breathe, which is gaseous, all of those three materials, solid, liquid, gas, all of them, as a matter of physics, are at a subatomic level, are vibrations. They're frequencies. They're built out of frequencies. The word electron was the word for amber in ancient Greece. Electron, it translates, amber translates to, and why is that relevant? Well, when electricity was first discovered, rubbing amber together would create sparks. electrons. Now, some of you probably remember from your sixth grade science or whatever that atoms are built out of protons, neutrons, and electrons. And everything we deal with in this world, the solid table, the solid phone, the solid semi-solid head, and then the air and the water around us as well as electromagnetic spectrum, are all vibrational. This is just a matter of hard, unequivocal science. And why is that being mentioned? Well, we'll talk about that, because when we get radiation coming at us that's artificial from satellites, from mobile phone networks, from electrical lines, that changes um, our composition of materials. It does something to them, and I'll talk a bit about that. This is a matter of hard science, and that's why in other countries that, unlike the U.S., that have continued to study RF radiation, for example, impacts on bees, impacts on humans, they've dramatically reduced the levels. Okay, next slide. So in terms of the healing and old growth forest DNA, I'll talk about that a bit. Again, everything you're looking at, those trees that are there, are at some level are vibrational. So keep that in the back of your mind. But let's talk a bit about some of the more tangible pieces of what the old growth forests do for us, and why I'm heavily involved in restoring them. And then we can talk a little bit about how the fact that trees are antennas, and why this all circles back to frequencies as well. So one is, the U.S. has believe it or not, the oldest tree recorded on the planet. Its name is Methuselah. It's in the high and undisclosed location in the Sierra Mountains, about 5,000 years old. The Archangel Ancient Tree Archive has actually cloned it. There's a book on the subject about all its work, and I'll reference books throughout our talk, and we have a reading list at the back of the PDF as well. But recommend you read this book by New York Times science writer Jim Robbins, The Man Who Planted Trees, by Jim Robbins, and it talks about, in various chapters, the cloning of the oldest trees, the largest trees, different trees which have different properties medicinally or for cleaning water. For example, the willow tree, bar none, is one, the source of the original aspirin was made from the willow tree. Two, willow trees, bar none, are the best trees for cleaning water. And for example, in upstate New York, a decade or two ago, the water system up there in upstate New York was going to be, in terms of sanitation and in terms of drinkable water, there was going to be a whole water reclamation plant built using a lot of big pumps, man-made materials and systems, a lot of fiberglass, a lot of plastic, a lot of fossil fuels to run this big gargantuan water treatment facility. And instead, after a lot of positive pressure being applied, they were told, and repeatedly, why don't you instead plant around the aquifers willow trees? It'll be much less expensive, and the water will be just as clean, and it'll not take so much of a artificial resources in terms of fossil fuels and power plants and plastics and pumps and things like that. So that is something which is tied to why would we restore our old growth forests? Why would we let nature, because the willow tree is a natural tree to North America, why wouldn't we let that predominate? And that's a good reason, because it would clean our air, our soil, and our water. In terms of trees as antennas, both also as data storage devices, if you've ever seen a picture of a giant redwood or a giant oak tree or a giant sequoia that was cut down, you can often see these huge radial tree rings. Some of these things, like the world's largest tree, General Sherman, it's a sequoia, it's 35 feet in diameter. So that's bigger than a living room in many cases. And you can count the tree rings. In that case, a tree like that would have 2,000 or 3,000 years worth of tree rings. And physicists and astronomers have often looked at the tree rings in order to validate their theories. For example, there are theories about when there were gamma radiation storms around the year 1300. And how do they prove that once they use their theories and they They try to go back in time, reading through radio astronomy, trying to read waves from the past, which is a whole level of technology. But one way to validate that is when they look at the tree rings, they see retardation in the growth of the tree in the exact same year when their hypothesis angled into, we think it was in this particular year where the gamma radiation storm happened. And lo and behold, when they looked at tree rings from a large number of trees that were old enough to have tree rings back then, the growth was retarded in that tree ring. It didn't expand at a normal rate in that particular year. So those trees are like computer servers. They're actually gathering data. They're also antennas. Trees issue pheromones and chemicals to ward off insects and bugs and other entities that are unfriendly to them. They also use pheromones and chemicals to attract entities that are friendly to them. Things, living things that are that old, they can't run away when there's a problem. We have legs, we can run away. Other flora and fauna have ways of getting around danger, but trees can't run away, but they know a lot about keeping at bay a lot of problems. A lot of the giant old trees have bark that's this thick. It's almost fire retardant. Some of them, like the coast redwoods, don't have a tree limb up, a full-grown, mature one, up until about 120 feet off the ground. So if there's a fire going by and the bark is this thick, they don't burn. A lot of trees actually need heat from fires for their pine cones to open and the seeds to disperse. So fires are natural as long as they're naturally occurring and there's not too much fuel, like when we've artificially suppressed forest fires for decades and then a fire goes through and there's too much fuel. That's unnatural. That's not the natural balance. That's not letting nature dictate the terms of how our forests grow and flourish. So those are all pieces to that. There's a hyperlink here in the PDF. You can go to the scientific proof for the value of old growth trees. Highly recommend you go to that. That's a paper I wrote. It's on the Archangel Ancient Tree Archives website. There's many, many, many more elements to old growth trees and why they're so good for us. For example, in Japan, since the 1960s and 70s, when people have had a pulmonary or a heart problem or a variety of other maladies, anxiety, sleeplessness, often when they go to their doctor would write them a prescription. But instead of it being a pill or a type of surgery, the literal prescription pad would say, hey, John, or Keto, or whoever that person is in Japan, you have to go to this particular forest 3 days a week and walk for 45 minutes. It's usually an old growth forest or a healthy outdoor environment. And lo and behold, peer-reviewed studies have shown for decades and decades have shown that walking in these old growth forests restore a lot of our natural function and reduce a lot of our problems that we have as modern humans, including pulmonary and cardiovascular and anxiety and sleeplessness and other problems. So the healing value of old growth forests is innumerable. And so whenever we have an extinction of a tree or anything that's been given to us, in nature, it's often a sad thing because we lose a lot of technology, a lot of things that are meant to help us. So that's a whole nother layer as well. Again, before I leave some of the old growth tree discussion, another book to read, really interesting, I highly recommend, is a book called Tree Thieves. Tree Thieves. It's about the $100+ billion a year, believe it or not, industry of stealing trees globally, sadly. In Africa and Brazil and the Amazon, even here in North America and many other places, trees are stolen at a ridiculously high rate. Why? Well, if they can get lumber for free, the thieves, they do it. And by their nature, a lot of our parks and forests, nationally and internationally, they're vast by their nature, and they're not heavily patrolled by their nature. They have a few rangers here and there who are often lightly armed against large organized crime. For example, in the recent, sadly, in the Ukraine-Russian war in the Ukraine, there is satellite documentation of large forests that were cut down and taken, just literally stolen, old-growth forests, because during war it was much easier to take them during wartime as a cover. And there was a fight about whether or not the forest had even existed. And there was a fakery around some of the satellite images saying, oh, those forests were never there when we got there, but they were. They were doctoring those images. There's still another area to talk about, which is the integrity of our maps and our systems, the integrity of our maps and systems. I helped build with some GIS, geospatial engineering information system experts, mappers from the University of Maryland, a champion tree archive um, database, an atlas. An atlas is really a database tied to maps. So we know where the oldest and largest trees of different species are, and we've mapped them and they're protected. We don't publish it because sadly then people can go and cut them down and take them, or sometimes people who are disturbed, mentally disturbed, take them down because they're mentally disturbed. So it's not readily published, but we have provide access to that to the scientists and people who are trying to restore and help reflourish old growth forests. So that's some background there on that. And we can go to the next slide. Now, okay, so let's talk a little bit about this title of a story just a couple of days ago, the screen that ate your child's education. So I was talking a bit earlier about screen addiction and how at the Environmental Health Trust, we are working on how to restore sanity to our environment and our children's environment, or anyone's environment. Screen addiction is a major problem in the education world, as well as everything from newborns to nursing homes, to end of life. A lot of people are addicted to their phones. Let's start with a newborn. When somebody is born, typically it's in a hospital, not always, but typically. And hospitals are one of the locations where there's a lot of RF, radio frequency radiation. There's all kinds of monitors and beepers, and a lot of people are carrying these things as well. And then imagine a newborn baby then taken from the birthing OB/GYN facility in the hospital down to the car for the first time. Now imagine, what if that car is an electric car, a Tesla or some other electric car with a 1-ton battery? What does that mean? Has anyone properly measured what happens when you sit on top of a 1-ton battery? Is that impacting you from an electromagnetic radiation standpoint? That, in my view, and in the view of many scientists, has not been properly studied. Has not been properly studied. In fact, the Environmental Health Trust, we put a shareholder petition in last year at the Tesla shareholders meeting with a bunch of science talking about, hey, Tesla, have you even measured this? By the way, it's not just the battery, the 1-ton battery. What else is going on in that car? I was talking earlier about competing on safety. The industry, to their credit, has made cars a lot safer. Good. But have they measured the radiation from all the sensors, from all the side airbags and front airbags and the Wi-Fi in the vehicle and all that? Let alone have they then measured what's it like if somebody's got a phone, the driver, and 2 or 3 of the passengers, and then the newborn baby sitting there in their little baby seat on top of a 1-ton battery, with all these sensors, all the Wi-Fi, and all these phones. Why isn't that being measured? Real issue. On top of that, the screen addiction, if you're addicted to your screen, what does that mean? That means often the screen is from a wireless device. So you're getting more radiation exposure while you're addicted to the screen with all the problems. Anyway, this article and a variety of other items that are cited throughout this presentation talk about hard science about the dramatic drop in educational capabilities in our children, starting around 2020 with the advent of COVID and more screen time that was required, and there's a series of problems. There's also a book by Jonathan Haidt, The Anxious Generation. Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. Highly recommend you look at that. I'm on the board of 2 schools. One is the Brookwood School for Girls here in Montgomery County, Maryland. One's the Avalon School for Boys. And they have a policy, no, can't have your phone on. And also, they're reaching out through their publications to the parents, the regular newsletter and regular magazines to the parents, and that are written by the educators about, like, hey, really read The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. Hey, really look seriously at dramatically reducing screen time. What can you do? Because it's kind of the Wild West. It's sort of like the days of cocaine and Coca-Cola, the days of heroin and cough syrup. These things are highly addictive. They've not been properly regulated, and it's literally taking away from folks' educational abilities and causing addiction. So anyway, a lot of details there if you want to take a peek at that. Next slide, kindly. A little primer on the advent of wireless before we talk a little bit more about wireless. So I don't know if you know what the Leyden jar is, but there was this jar back in the 1700s that you could capture electricity in. You could see the shocks going through. And then later, Ben Franklin, obviously, his famous experiment where he always wondered, could I harness he presumed that lightning bolts were electric, and he presumed correctly, almost died doing it. But he learned how to start harnessing natural electricity. The first person ever killed in terms of a scientist killed by electrocution was an unfortunate fellow named George Richmond. And then we fast forward another 100 years or so to Maxwell's equations. James Clerk Maxwell was a famous physicist who formally published a series of equations about the properties of electromagnetic radiation. And then later, a fellow named Heinrich Hertz proved the existence of electromagnetic waves and how they oscillate. And you can measure the oscillation of electromagnetic waves, whether they're light waves or radio waves or gamma rays, in hertzes. It's named after Heinrich there. It's a little background. So, there's megahertz, there's gigahertz. The radio station dials, 98.7, megahertz on your FM dial. That's Hertz, Heinrich Hertz. And then not much later was a fellow named Marconi who thought about putting together a series of different piece parts of transmitters, of what's something called a coherer, which is a system for gathering radio waves and making them coherent. And he put together a series of elements based on the prior work of Maxwell and Hertz and others, and made the first radio. And things weren't the same after that. For example, the first commercial merchant ship that had wireless on it was under the Canadian Pacific Line. And later they made sure all their Canadian Pacific Line ships had radios on them. They just did that as a feature to attract their passengers. By the way, passengers and workers on ships were called souls. They didn't call them people, they called them souls. We have X number of souls aboard. And lo and behold, in July of 1910, one of the Canadian Pacific Line ships, the USS Montrose, was sailing from Europe to Canada, and it had on board one of these radios, and it became involved in the saving of some survivors of the Titanic. The Titanic did not have a radio on board, and officials realized later, boy, that would have been great if we'd had a radio on board. We might have learned of the iceberg that was in the way, and definitely when we struck it, we might have been able to radio for help much more efficiently, and maybe we wouldn't have lost all those passengers. So therefore, it became a requirement. That all vessels on the seas have radio waves, i.e. transceivers, i.e. radios. There's a lot of good reasons for why we have wireless systems and why the age of wireless is popular in our economies and in our hospitals and in a variety of other locations. However, it's out of balance in the sense that we don't talk enough about the harms that are associated. Everything, has an equal and opposite reaction when you start putting artificial energy into something. You start putting artificial energy into something, it impacts us at a microcellular level, and it impacts us on a variety of other levels. By the way, when ships started putting radios and telegraphs, wireless telegraphs on board, they discovered very quickly to keep them away from their ship's compass. Why? Because the ship's compass would go wonky. It would get inaccurate because the electromagnetic radio waves were impacting the ship's compass. It would no longer be accurate if the system was too close to it. Well, think about that. They were very concerned that one type of instrument wouldn't harm another type of instrument, and that was the priority. they didn't really think about what does it mean to have these radio waves around humans or pets or anything else. And that predominates to this very day here in the United States. When you go and buy a Wi-Fi router for $29 at Best Buy or online, that router, before it was allowed to go on the market, had to go through what's called a spectrum manager. And the spectrum manager would assess whether or not that router was not going to interfere with other wireless systems that were licensed or unlicensed and allowed in this country or globally sometimes. And but they didn't look that hard at whether or not it would interfere with us, would it harm us? Because we're also sadly regulated hardly much differently than uh, devices and networks. We're sadly not regulated much different than devices and networks. There are some rules about how much interference can hit us here in the United States, how much RF exposure, how much radiation can hit us. But it's arguably one of the lowest priorities compared to not interfering with other wireless systems. And then going back to that example about how even at the very beginning of radios being put on board ships, they made sure it didn't interfere with other instrumentation, the compass. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about humans. So again, the regulations that are out there, and again, the Environmental Health Trust has the FCC on remand in federal court on this subject. We've poured thousands of pages of information into the system from well-renowned scientists. We have scientists on our board from Yale Medical School and from a variety of other great locations. And again, overseas, other countries, the equivalent of the Swiss Environmental Protection Agency or the Italian Environmental Protection Agency or the Swedish or whatever, go down the list, they've been studying harms to humans from RF radiation for decades. In the United States, when the 1996 Telecommunications Act was passed and signed into law, part of that signing into law was also the cutting of the US EPA's budget to zero, cutting it to zero. The budget was cut to zero. And why? Well, there's an old saying, don't ask a question you don't want the answer to. So obviously, the industry had pushed the regulators and the folks on the Hill who were writing the 1996 Telecom Act and the other laws that were signed on the same day associated with it to cut the EPA's budget to zero to study the harms. And other agencies, National Institutes of Health, FDA, are not by any stretch looking at this as a massive priority, and they're not studying the impacts. What do they study? Well, years ago, decades ago in the 80s, they looked at a study where, and this is kind of icky, but they took some rats and they put some anal thermometers in them, and they put them in a container and they subjected them to radiation, RF radiation. And when they stopped moving around, that's when they set the standard. They're like, oh, that's the standard. We'll cut it by 50, and that'll be the standard. It's called a thermal standard. There's a lot of RF radiation, like your microwave ovens, operate in the same bands of many of our wireless devices. Our microwave ovens operate in the same bands as our wireless devices. So their standard was it's thermal. If we don't cook people, that'll be the standard, which of course is kind of ridiculous because there's also biometric problems associated, biology problems, not just burning us. There's something called the autonomic nervous system response to polarized waveforms. The autonomic nervous system response to polarized waveforms. What does that mean? That means that digitized waveforms, artificial waveforms, not the radiation you get from the sun, but the radiation you get from towers, artificial broadcast towers, and from these types of devices, causes a negative reaction to 100% of us. And it's not just humans, it's also our pets, our flora, and our fauna. And this has been studied at a cellular level, microcellular level, and a variety of other levels and proven. Again, the US has been, in terms of the government agencies, that's why they're on remand in the federal court because they've not been addressing this blatant issue. And as you can see here in this picture, humans, we can see some types of spectrum, right? We can see colors. Most of us, some people are colorblind. Some people can see more colors than other people. There's a variety of different types of humans, but the average human can see the blue in my tie or can see, the green in the tree or whatever. By the way, the human eye can see more shades of green than any other color typically. So we can see, that's somewhere between 430 and 790 terahertz on the light spectrum, the visible light spectrum. Then down in the sound spectrum, down between 20 to 20 or so hertz to kilohertz, there is the auditory, what we can hear. Again, most humans can hear and can pick up audio waves, but that's just a infinitesimal percentage of the RF that we're exposed to. Light is a form of radiation, as is sound, as is also the microwaves, the millimeter bands, and the other bands that wireless devices operate from. And as noted by Einstein, theory of relativity and a variety of associated theorems, hard proof is that the wireless networks and the wireless systems that Marconi started tinkering with and that are here to this day, they operate at the speed of light. In other words, your cell phone radiation that operates on your cell phone moves at the speed of light, 187,000 miles per hour, roughly 300,000 kilometers per hour. What does that mean? Well, if you think about it, when you're wherever you're sitting or standing and listening to this, this for example is the Verizon network. This is an iPhone, but nobody ever knocked on your door from Verizon or from another network, T-Mobile, or from another network, AT&T, or from the local power company, which has utility trucks that use wireless systems and a variety of others. They didn't all knock on your door and say, "Can I blast my network through your body and through your house and through your pets and your plants and your kids at the speed of light? Can I do that?" Nobody's ever asked your permission for that, which is kind of odd when you think about it, because it's kind of like, well, how about you only blast through my house if I'm using your network, and also if I give you permission. Maybe that's a concept that should be brought more to the forefront, because our systems, our biological systems, our bodies are operating on many other levels, microcellular levels and other levels, and do see and feel and do react to radiation that you can't see. That's why when you go get an X-ray, they go in another room and they make you wear a thick leaded coat. Now that's a form of what's called ionizing radiation. There's most wireless radiation that's used for communications is called non-ionizing, but it still has proven negative biological impacts. Again, your autonomic nervous system for 100% of humans your autonomic nervous system has a negative reaction to polarized waveforms. They've also put these in beehives, and they've also put beehives near towers. And in many, many cases, the bees either slow down their production of honey, or they completely abandon their hives, never to return. What does that mean? Most of our plants that we eat, and that if you're a meat eater, a lot of a cow or a sheep eats plants, right? So what does that mean when our prime propagators are being harmed by the ever increasing satellite and terrestrial wireless networks? So these are all big things that we're studying, and just wanted you to see that visual about how humans, we can only perceive without help, can only perceive a tiny amount of the radiation that's hitting us. And again, the radiation that's hitting us that's ever increasing is not naturally occurring. It's not a natural system that helps us. In almost every respect, there's harmful indicia proven through peer-reviewed studies. There's a variety of cases I'm involved in on this subject. There's the federal case where we got the FDA and the FCC subject to this remand. There's another case, Danny Block via Nokia, which is part of what are called the Murray cases. There were 81 people who, most of them had brain tumors. Many of them passed away, and about 20 years ago started suing over this. This woman, Danny Block, who I actually represent in another capacity, she had half her body paralyzed through an intracerebral hemorrhage, and she survived. She had to learn how to walk and talk again. But she saved her phones, and we've been measuring those phones, taking them to FCC certified labs. And sadly, the phones she was using over the years a large number of them, we've measured 8 of them now, weren't even meeting the FCC's ancient outmoded standard, uh, which by itself is a problem. The ancient outmoded standard is a problem, but they weren't even meeting that standard according to the FCC certified lab results. This is all on the record in Danny Block v. Nokia. But so, if you think about competing on safety, promoting phones and wireless devices and networks that are safer than others, much like how Volvo started competing on safety in the car industry. Let's get the phone networks and phone device makers and the regulators who regulate them to start competing on safety. And once the animal forces of competition move on that, that'll be great. Same thing with get them to compete on reducing the amount of addictivity that's been programmed into the social media algorithms that these wireless devices and any other device carries. Reduce the addictivity, much like when they took cocaine out of Coca-Cola. You can still get your soda or whatever you drink, but take controlled substances out of it and take algorithms that were designed to be addictive by neuroscientists who are hired specifically by these social media companies. Again, these social media companies are being sued by the attorney generals of most states on this very subject in what's called an MDA, a multi-district litigation. And again, when you're not addicted, then you're not near the device as much, and you're not getting all that RF exposure as much as well. And then 3, you're competing on cleaner air, soil, and water. These are all the things I'm working on, both on a frequency level and all the way down to a pragmatic level, reforestation with old growth genetics, making sure ecosystem communities like the Friends of the Ecosystem Restoration Movement, where we take communities and we intentionally build communities around communal kitchens and housing and food forests and farms that are organic and farm to table content, and people who want to be around an area that's much healthier, designed to be healthier. Food laws, for example, in Italy, the food comes from typically the encouragement and the subsidies are around having local food that's made out of strict food laws. Another area I'd encourage you to get involved in looking at is the spectrum managers. Again, these people are the gatekeepers for wireless networks, whether they're big satellite networks or a tiny device you buy, a Wi-Fi or a tiny Apple Watch. They have to go through a spectrum manager to make sure they comply with the licenses upon which they're designed to operate and make sure they don't interfere with other devices and networks. And of course, we want them to stop interfering with humans, flora, and fauna. The NSMA, the National Spectrum Management Association, just had its 40th anniversary this year. What is the NSMA? The NSMA is the largest known collection of spectrum managers from government and from industry. And since 2019, I've been very involved and I've been on their board and I'm their past president, been very involved in pushing into the annual proceedings, studies and awareness around human RF exposure and RF exposure to flora and fauna. And this year, when I presented, this was at the National Press Club, and you can find this at nsma.org. And again, there's a link right here. You can go find it as well in the PDF that will be circulating. We had a competing on safety panel with renowned scientist, Dr. Deborah Davis, who founded the Environmental Health Trust, spoke. And Dr. Robert Brown, the chief scientist of the Environmental Health Trust, who has recently published a very interesting case study where he's a radiologist by trade. He showed somebody's blood flow through the back of their leg, right behind their knee, slowed and formed what's called rouleau formation, where the red blood cells essentially started clumping when exposed to a cell phone, just holding a cell phone next to the leg behind the knee. Well, that's a huge development to prove that if you're holding a phone next to your body and your blood flow, your red blood cells start clogging or clumping, that's a problem, right? That's a pre-stroke type of condition. So he spoke about that work. We had a gentleman named Tom Ferguson speak who does a really interesting thing. He builds RF monitoring, wireless radiation monitoring systems for a company called Waterford. And he spoke also about how the fact that in France and in Israel and in Australia, this wireless radiation, these frequencies that you cannot see, They have essentially weather devices, our radiation weather devices, to look at the radiation weather in certain areas of France and Israel and Australia. What does that mean? If you know what the air quality index is, the AQI, you can look up, what kind of pollution is in the air. You might not be able to see it, but you can look it up every morning. And often they tell you, oh, the air quality is really bad or really good. And when it's really bad, they warn people who have lung conditions or asthma or other conditions, to be wary. But we don't do that in the United States. We don't measure the radiation exposure levels. Well, they are doing that in 3 other countries. Again, these other countries are way, way ahead of us in terms of their RF radiation power levels that are allowed to hit people and of course the rest of the environment. And also they're actually giving you a weather report. So we talked about that. I also talked about a program I have in a lab I have called Thought Delivery Systems. A division of it's called Cardinal Communications, and this is a big concept. But if you're familiar with the Human Genome Project, where every human's DNA strands were measured, and that became a big mass collaboration project among scientists a couple of decades ago, and very very changing for humanity and for flora and fauna, because now we can track the DNA of a variety of living creatures, including ourselves, to assess, are we predisposed to certain health outcomes and a variety of other, meritorious needs for that information. However, another part of us, again, as I mentioned at the top of the discussion, all living things, or all things, are made up of frequencies. This pen, this table, the air around us, the water that we drink, it's all ultimately frequency based. But nobody has ever, if you can go back to the slide I was just on prior, at the very bottom, you see something called the Human Flora and Fauna RF Signature Program. It's modeled on the Human Genome Project. And so I spoke to this. All of us have a unique radiation signature. We all have a unique radiation signature, much like we have unique fingerprints. Well, our optics, if you scan your eyes, you probably have this done at the airport, each one of our eyes is unique. Well, we also have a very unique and very measurable RF signature around us. And people can assess if your shoulder was broken 14 years ago, or even if you had a bad relationship with your a relative, 28 years ago. It's actually recorded and this has been proven. There's a professor from Yale who started studying this in the 30s and 40s, and this type of research has progressed, but nobody's been properly measured. And one way to do that is to use the very sophisticated spectrum analyzers that are used in the satellite and in the wireless industry to make sure this device doesn't interfere with your garage door opener and things like that. But we've never turned those highly sensitive precision measurement systems onto measuring humans' flora and fauna, and it's very doable. So I'm pushing this program called the Human Flora and Fauna RF Signature Program, and I think people will be astounded that 30 years from now, that when you walked into the doctor's office, the first thing they didn't do was look at your measurement of your actual RF signature that's radiating from your body. All living things are electrical. All electrical things issue a field, an electrical field, and we all have them. But for example, if you cut your skin, it doesn't heal unless your skin cells operate at 50 hertz. You need a certain amount of energy. If you're at a lower energy level in the 20 hertz range, your skin cells don't heal as quickly. So if you were scanned for that, you could see if your energy levels are low in certain areas, for example. And that might mean you're sick or have a broken bone or depressed or whatever. But the working theory is that people, if you get your actual essentially your RF signature measured, and that's unique to you, then your doctor and anyone else can learn more about you without having to do invasive surgeries or invasive other types of analyses. Okay, next slide. We've already talked about the National Spectrum Managers Association. There's just some more videos here. You can go to the next slide. So this begins a list of some of the programs I was talking about and how to find them. and the work they do around ecosystem restoration and the health of air, soil, and water, flora and fauna. I won't go through them all here verbally. I've mentioned most of them already on the talk. The next page has a few more of them. I'm involved in most of them, if not all of them, but wanted you to have that handy. And there's also some additional resources later on this slide deck in terms of broadcast media. I encourage you to look at. I'll talk for a bit about a few other books. One is Stronghold. This book is by the folks who, it's about a fellow named Guido Rahr, who founded the Wild Salmon Center. It's a really interesting book for all of humanity until he got involved. Nobody knew where our salmon went when they left a river in Alaska or a river in Russia or wherever else. And nobody knew when they'd come back. They sort of came back on their own when they felt like it. There was no hard and fast calendar. And he was really curious about that. He's like, well, why isn't that happening? Why don't we know where they go? So he developed resources and a plan to map where they go. And he went to a guy named Gordon Moore, who founded Intel. Intel was a computer chip company. And Gordon Moore gave him $300 million and said, go and map the world's salmon. And when he did that, he found a bunch of amazing things. And he also explained to like oligarchs in the Russian wilderness. In Russia, often an oligarch controls a huge area, let's say the size of California, which has, could have lots of rivers. And often they would chop down all the trees and strip mine and put huge nets in front of the rivers and capture all the salmon. And you'd see these huge piles of dead salmon because they were just cutting the caviar out and they weren't really thinking about letting the salmon live naturally and reproduce naturally. And he explained to them the economics around if you actually don't destroy your environment, if you don't destroy all the trees with clear cutting, all the topsoil with strip mining, all the salmon with egregious netting of everything just for the greedy accumulation of a short-term economic hit of selling some caviar, but then you've lost most of your salmon. If you look at the long-term economics, he proved that you make more money and you're healthier and your environment's healthier if you respect the natural flow. You let the divine order of nature be the guide and you assist it. You're a good steward instead of a destroyer. And he proved this in a variety of scientifically based ways. And lo and behold, where the world's largest bears are is where the world's largest salmon are, because the bears catch the salmon and they drop them next to a lot of the trees. You get some of the world's largest trees because then all the protein from the salmon carcasses after the bears are done eating then fertilize the trees, and it's a whole self-renewing, self-licking ice cream cone, a positive cycle, not a vortex, not a negative cycle like a dust bowl and a destructive cycle, but a great, wonderful cycle. And he also figured out that the healthiest rivers is where all 7 species of salmon, sockeye, coho, chinook, steelhead, et cetera, when there's perfect harmony and perfect health along these strongholds, these areas where the salmon spawn, they self-regulate. And minutes after the coho leave after spawning, within minutes, then like the chinook come in or one of the other salmon species, and they have a way of globally communicating with each other if they're left unmolested by harmful impacts, human-based impacts. And there's a lot of lessons there. And again, those are places where you have the freshest water, you have the biggest trees, you have the healthiest environments. And anyway, so Stronghold, really interesting book. There's another book for those of you who are looking at these concepts about respecting the air, the soil, and the water, and the flora and the fauna. There's a book called Should Trees Have Standing? Should Trees Have Standing? Can somebody represent a tree in a courtroom before you cut it down? There is a little known thing in ancient English law called a river keeper. A river can be represented in court. And we inherited that. The US, Australia, Canada have that, and we have river keepers here. In fact, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Was a river keeper, and he founded a water keepers and river keepers. There's 2 different groups. I think they represent over 300 rivers and protect them. And you can walk into a courtroom if somebody's polluting, a river. You can literally represent the river if you become the official river keeper or water keeper, depending on the body of water. Anyway, highly recommend reading that. There's a great book about Marconi. I was talking about the history of wireless. It's an easy read. It's nonfiction, but a really good book called Thunderstruck by Eric Larson. And there's a variety of other books, but that are listed here. But I just wanted to share all that with the likes of you folks, you good folks who are here on today's webinar. And I think I'll wrap that part of it up. And if Daniel wants to, if I haven't, I don't know how much time's left or what the idea is, but happy to chitty chat.
Happy to chit chat. Thanks, Joe. I do want to chitty chat. Yes, absolutely. We've got 50 minutes, and I'll use at least 20 of them for my questions, and then we have try to save 30 for the attendees to participate and put theirs in the Q&A box, and then I'll read them to you as well. So we've got a couple there. Yeah, so this is great sort of framing and perspective. There's a couple pieces that you and I have discussed that I didn't hear you touch on yet, and I wanted to focus on. So specifically, when I teach my courses and talk about these things, I talk about the fact that we do have this. You call it RF, I say EMF. I'm not sure if there's those are just sort of synonyms, or maybe I just don't know the technical terms, but radio frequency or electromagnetic frequency, pollution. My understanding is that yeah, life communicates through frequency, through antennas, through vibration, and that's just a big part of who we are and how we discern, and not just us animals, but also plants and insects and all kinds of other things. And so, if you look at the shape of a leaf and you look at the veins on that leaf, I do this when I teach courses. I draw the veins out first, and I say, back in the olden days, we used to have these things on top of our houses. And I remember those, and I say, oh yeah, an antenna, and I draw a circle around, and I say, and be like, oh, that looks like a leaf. I'm like, yeah. And what's that on top of insects' heads? We call them antenna. Right. So there is this foundational thing which I understand, which is that life communicates through frequency, is constantly um, engaging in, you know, receiving and propagating out frequencies. And um, my understanding is the more we have this electromagnetic frequency pollution, this RF, this dissonant RF frequency, I think you use the term ionizing. Um, it has a really, and this is where I want to ask you, as I understand it, it has a negative, sort of a baseline negative draining, impact on our system function, and not just us animals, but plants and, all life. And so when I talk about this, I say, look, um, if we can break it, we can fix it. If it's possible to project dissonance into the environment, it's possible to project coherence into the environment. Um, but one of the things we can start with is, how do we project less dissonance? And I think when you and I have talked, you've talked about routers that are projecting much less dissonance, and you've got suggestions, and you've got things people can buy, they can put in their houses. From a practical standpoint, I mean, you talked about legal stuff, like let's have court cases, and let's change the laws about this. And I appreciate people who believe in lobbying government and the court system. And I maybe call me jaded, but I've come to a point of like, well, in the meantime, are there things I can do for my family and my animals and my plants on my land to help project that coherence? So I really want to go into this conversation about what can people practically do. And I think you've got a lot of suggestions there, which I haven't heard you speak to yet. That's really what I wanted to try to
Sure.
put forth.
Yeah, no, I love that question. Love it. I know we've had a lot of discussions around that. So, sort of on the top line, a few things. One, yeah, there's two types of radiation: ionizing and non-ionizing. Ionizing is like the X-rays that strip electrons literally from your molecules in your atoms, whereas non-ionizing, which most mobile wireless and others is doesn't strip the electrons, still very, 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 very harmful, and proven to be, but in most radio waves, invisible light is non-ionizing, but still both harmful biologically and often thermally as well. But going to your question, what does it mean to have some agency when you're
Yeah.
waiting for the government or the industry to come around? And it looks like a variety of things. One
Yeah.
is, reduce, keep the phone out of your pocket, keep it away from your body, sleep with it in another room. Two, there are many routers, often available in Europe, where they cycle at somewhere like one millionth of the amount of times they cycle here in the US. What does that mean? So some routers will ping you, ping, 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 ping you millions of times in a second. And one, you could turn off your, you could set your router on a timer to turn it off. Two, you could buy a router that pings you and still works. You can still get your internet, wireless internet, or go to wireline internet. You remember? I don't know if you remember that for some of the folks of a certain age, you remember the blue cords you'd plug in when you went to a work or to a hotel or in your home office.
Ethernet. Yeah.
Ethernet. Yeah. There's a variety of ways to dramatically reduce exposure. Also, electrical systems themselves. Light dimmers are notoriously dirty. They emit a lot of RF. Light dimmers are not good. There's a variety of other elements out there, but using and also not using the AirPods, the wireless AirPods.
AirPods.
Um,
Yeah, exactly.
Most there's a recent video out. I could send it around. A lot of NFL players who work in these radiation intensive stadiums. 5G. Well, sometimes the first place they put it, and they have big ads like 5G now at the stadium in Philadelphia or whatever, the NFL cities that are 5G, and they're well aware. So if you look carefully, there's a video I can send around where a lot of them have stopped wearing wireless earpods. They're going back to wireline, which have a lower radiation signature. I recommend just none. Just use your speakerphone. Put your phone on. If you're going to use your phone, you can. If you're in a building that has Wi-Fi, you can program it to use voice over Wi-Fi versus through the carrier. You get much less exposure when you do that, for example. And there's a variety of other tricks, so to speak, on the Environmental Health Trust website.
Okay, so
EHT.
this
Yeah. Yeah.
EHT.org.
Yeah.
Is
EHtrust.org. Environmentalhealthtrust.org.
EHtrust.org.
Yeah.
Is there
And
a sort of slash something? You know,
yeah,
you'll,
if you just go to the website and just ask for, tips on reducing, cell phone radiation or whatever. We have all kinds of FAQs, frequently asked questions, and all kinds of pages on that subject. And
and
that's one of the organizations at the back of the presentation, Environmental Health Trust. Um,
yeah.
and it's
And
heavily cited typically by, it is the scientific repository for these issues. It's the global scientific repository. And,
and sources or routers and things like, so if you've got Wi-Fi in your house, and you want to not be frying your children and everything else with it,
right.
uh, they're all those different sources of routers, et cetera, are all on that site as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't say all. There's always something new coming, but yes, there are sources for those routers. Also, if you go to I mentioned the National Spectrum Managers Association,
Yeah,
nsma.org, and all the conferences are available for free.
yeah,
If you go to the 2023 conference, nsma.org conferences page, 2023, you'll see where we presented on human RF exposure. And there's a whole presentation which shows a lot of the routers and other technologies. And another type of soft technology is the deed to your own property. There's a gentleman who created a movie called Canary in the Gold Mine, sort of a play on Canary in the Coal Mine. Canary in a coal mine. Miners used to bring canaries in cages down when they're mining, and if the canary died or fell over, they knew there was poisonous gas because the canaries
yeah,
were more sensitive and they'd run out. So, Canary in the Gold Mine is a movie about this gentleman. His wife had electromagnetic hypersensitivity, about 4% of the population does. And she could literally feel if there was a dirty electrical wire behind the wall, and they'd have to fix it. And the electrician's like, "You're right." Some people can sense it because just like
yeah,
if you have as an example, if you've ever had a bruise, let's say you have a bruise on your hand, and if somebody keeps tapping it, it gets more inflamed and more, sensitive. And so a lot of people who are continuously exposed to this radiation, harmful radiation, the ones who get more and more inflamed are much more sensitive. Their sort of the canary in the gold mine, so to speak. So he put out a movie, and it was all about his hunt to find a safe place for his wife to live. And they moved to Switzerland, and that didn't work out for him. And they ultimately bought a bunch of land in rural Vermont. And part of his soft technology solution was his deed says that no RF is allowed on his property. Now, it gets murky about how enforceable it is. And of course, if he bought 17 acres in Manhattan, it would be impractical to enforce that deed. But he uses that when he knows that towers are proposed to go up near him. And those are some soft power ways, as well as, nobody's really gone to all the carriers, as I mentioned earlier in the talk. Nobody said, well, you didn't knock on my door saying you were going to transmit through my property. Property rights are very powerful, and that's a very powerful argument. Another powerful argument is, and we won this in Stamford, Connecticut. This is on the Environmental Health Trust website, the ehtrust.org website. If you look up Stamford, Connecticut, we got the council in Stamford to vote, I think it was 12-5, to not deploy a 5G network. And part of it is we educated the council. It's all in public hearings. They're all on the website. A lot of news articles as well, to ask questions. For example, ask the carrier that's proposing to build, are you insured against radiation harms? Guess what? They typically can't answer that, because typically they're underinsured or not insured. Lloyd's of London won't even insure wireless carriers, for example. There's no insurance underwriters. There's speculation. That's why Apple keeps a massive, it has one of the biggest cash hoards of any corporation, hundreds of billions of dollars, for the day they, speculation that they lose the cases for harming folks. So you could ask your local authorities before you approve this new build. Can you just ask them for their insurance to make sure they're insured against protecting us? I know it's, probably a crazy idea that this would harm us, but are they insured against? They're not typically, or they're underinsured. Two, you could ask them to prove that their existing networks, before they come and build a new network near you, ask, is their existing network meeting the FCC's standards? Again, the standards are outmoded. They're not very good, but you should at least prove you're meeting those outmoded standards. And often it's very hard for them to prove they're even meeting those standards. Now, in a way to think about it, to visualize it. So in Europe, for example, in Italy, 10% of the power levels of the US, Switzerland, 3% of the power levels allowed. So imagine that in terms of speed limits. So if the speed limit in Italy is 65 miles an hour, 1/10 of the US speed limit, that means cars would be allowed to operate at 650 miles an hour here, if you think about it in those terms. Unsafe. I think we'd all agree, kind of unsafe. but also when you measure how fast they are going, how again, I've mentioned earlier that in the Danny Block case, we measured a lot of her phones. She had an intracerebral hemorrhage. We've measured 8 of her phones now that she used, or her records say she used. They're not even meeting that standard. So they're going over 650 miles an hour. They're doing 1,000 miles an hour. So that's, if you can think of it in those terms. So you can ask, you have a lot of soft power. Ask the local authorities before you allow that permit. Show us that you're meeting the FCC standard, which they are by law supposed to do. They're supposed to have a report. Show us that report. Oh, yeah, you guys can come in, build your 5G or whatever. Show us that your 3G and 4G met the rules. And by the way, are you insured? I'm sure that's easy to show us, so you're insured against harming us. Those are really good tools in addition to the tech. There's something called the Radio Free Quiet Zone in a big hunk of West Virginia and Southwest Virginia. Little known, but you can look it up, the Radio Free Quiet Zone. It's a national radio quiet zone for radio astronomy, and the U.S. Navy had some intel stuff and everything down there. A lot of people have moved there who have electromagnetic hypersensitivity. They just want to get away from it. So there's very few wireless signals there by federal, enforced by federal law. And there's a variety of other ways to look at it. There are a lot of people who are putting up shielding in homes. That's if you're living in an urban complex or urban environment. Now, a lot of the wealthy are doing this. A lot of the wealthy don't allow their kids to use the products that they're selling us. And this is well documented, very well documented, which is a whole other thing. They know obviously, because they're literally selling it to us and not letting their kids use it, or grandkids or whatever the case may be. So those are some aspects, but the thing to be worried about with shielding is there are a lot of products out there that say, oh, if you wrap your phone in this particular case, or if you put this specific device on the phone, it'll cancel out the harmful radiation, and that has not been standardized or studied. So I look at that with caution, and there is a need for a body, much like you're doing with the Bionutrient Food Institute and your devices and your kits. We have a kit that we let libraries get grants for. We issue a grant at the Environmental Health Trust where a library can get a grant to bring in RF meters, radio spectrum analyzers, into assess an area, and train people how to do that. And we're gonna be rolling that out more and more in that RF training school and making it accessible. And again, the more people know, the more they can say, look, you want to deploy here, or you're already deploying here, you're not meeting your standard. So how about you come into compliance before one? You can teach people how to file complaints and file cases. And there's a whole lot of ways to also reduce it, not just accept it like, oh, I got to cover up and wear shields and walk around you know, like a Bedouin with covered, whatever. You don't have to do that. You don't have to always be on defense. Offense sometimes is the best defense. I don't know if that
Well,
helps.
I really appreciate that offense strategy that you're putting forth, but in a lot of places, 5G exists, and I mean, whenever I go into an urban environment, I mean, if I'm not a totally sensitive person, I am definitely sensitive. I definitely can experience these things, and if I hold my phone to my head, and I don't do at all anymore, but I used to, for an hour a day, and I would literally feel this pain in my head that was not like normal,
Yeah.
like in the ear, like what the hell's going on? And that's so I'm personally I feel like I'm sensitive to these things. Um, and I also understand that a lot of the things that people are sold, like a little magnet or a little, picture that they stick on the back of their phone, like I don't think that's gonna stop the EMF. And it's kind of like wishful thinking, I think, that a lot of people know something's wrong. They know that's not good for them. They buy a thing so they can quiet their conscience, but really it doesn't work. So I want to really focus on this point of what are things people can do now, in the milieu we're in, shy of shutting the system down systemically or preventing further development. And you're saying the Environmental Health Trust website has a bunch of stuff. Can you walk us through like router? Okay, you can change your router, and if you like, I don't live very close to the other houses. You can see them, but they're decently far away. Like a lot of people live closer to other people. Um, yeah, what can you do
Yes.
for your phone? What can you do for your
Yes.
phone?
Definitely, you can
What can you do
change your
about cell
router.
towers?
Yeah,
Yeah.
proximity is so important. The radiation decreases dramatically by proximity. So, if you want to have a neighborhood codicil or neighborhood code, it says we're going to all use wireline, Ethernet, or at least we're going to use safer routers, things like that. You can. I know people who've built, are very wealthy and are electromagnetically hypersensitive, and they've built specific homes designed around all this. So their electricity, for example, doesn't attach to the side of their house; it attaches to a shed away from the house, and the transformer is there. There's a whole variety of other aspects around that. Timers, again, timers, shutting down the Wi-Fi, using much lower cycling Wi-Fi, using wireline, a lot of timeouts like that, location. And then again, of course, pushing against, the exterior world, in terms of, ways to go to your county councils and things like that to insist that they show that they're going to deploy safely and have it deployed safely. Those are all aspects. And again, your phone, when you carry your phone around, put it on airplane mode. Unless you really need to know you have to take a call, it can be on airplane mode with Wi-Fi if it's in the house, instead of the carrier. Dramatically reduces. Keep it in another room whenever you can. Use the speakerphone. There's a lot of those basics that do a lot, quite a lot to help. And then if there are people in Brooklyn who they woke up and they have a little deck where they sit and have their coffee, and they're, a little deck not much bigger than this chair, and they wake up, and this is well documented. All of a sudden, on the light pole, like 15 feet from them, is a 5G base station right there on the light pole that wasn't there
Yeah.
before. Then you have a dramatic issue, right? Then you can. That's why I say know how to go on the offense and say, is that thing even meeting the requirements?
Yeah.
Push hard.
Yeah.
There are shielding systems, curtains, paints, things like that. There's no standardization around that right now. Some things intuitively work well. Some things can be harmful. For example, just to be well aware, there are some devices that they say they'll reduce the amount of RF coming into your phone and off your phone. However, if you're using your phone, it powers up. It's designed to power up to get the signal out. And if the device that's wrapping it, has a little hole for the antenna, like on this phone, on the iPhone, I don't know if you know this, but that's where the antennas, most of the antennas are this little indentation right here. And that's why it's not covered by the case. But if you're covering that, or you have a case that covers most of it, if you point this at your eye or near your body, you're going to be getting hit with even more than the phone. In my view, the U.S. standard is pathetic, but it's going to be worse if you buy a device that constrains it in a manner that you don't know how to use it and operate it. So these are all, it can get worse. So, know
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
you do.
And how about cell towers? I'm going to try to, yeah. Are there things you can do? So, as I said before, what I've said in, my presentations and from what I've learned from people in the sort of agronomic world, you know, if you can project dissonance into the environment, you can project coherence into the environment. Are you conversant in that? Are, things
Yeah,
where we
no,
can actually,
it's the you've heard of noise canceling headphones?
yeah,
Same concept. And there's a variety of technologies out there that are claiming to do that. What I haven't seen, and I'm not promoting it or discounting it, I'm just haven't seen studies that show, well, when you're emitting to reduce emissions, what is happening on a biological level? Is that a natural occurring? It's not the natural environment if we're all on a deserted island or in a remote boreal forest. You've got two polarized waveforms competing with each other to cancel each other out. Um, and we do know that the human and also other flora and fauna have 100% of us, 100% of us at a cellular level have a oxidative stress, a negative autonomic nervous system response to polarized waveforms. Translation, those digital waveforms harm all of us at some level, measurably so. You can imagine those little bouncy houses at McDonald's, I'm talking about those little ball bouncy houses.
yeah,
It's sort of like if those are your cells, whenever you're around polarized waveforms, which is almost all the time in an urban environment, at least, um, some of your cells, it's like throwing a hand grenade into those bouncy houses, and some of those balls get blown up. That's a rough example. Something is happening at the cellular level that's negative. It causes oxidative stress and other problems. And again, the Rouleau study I mentioned, where Dr. Brown, who's our chief scientist at Environmental Health Trust, he has a case study that shows that when you have a phone next to a leg, at least in this particular case study, the red blood cells start clogging. Uh, uh, that's not good. That's a pre-stroke condition. That could be a precancerous condition. Um, he has measured, and he's going to publish this soon. He's measured 40 other people, and that's underway through a university. He's got So there's going to be more information coming out on that. And these are the kinds of things. Keep the devices away from your body. Put them on airplane mode if you can. Put it on Wi-Fi calling. Turn
yeah,
it off when you can. Proximity for your Wi-Fi routers. Get rid of your Wi-Fi routers, or only have them on a timer, or when you flip a switch and it's on and it's off, and
yeah.
use Ethernet otherwise. Keep your dimmer switches. Get rid of dimmer switches, or uh, if you can, keep your electrical transformer at a shed instead of near your house. There's a whole variety of other aspects to this. We could go down a long list of. So
Well, I mean, these are the things I think we can leave people with that are things you can do now beyond I mean, I don't want to discount the organizing and educating and pushing back against the corporates and everything else, but leaving people with practical tools to me is a big thing. Um, yeah, I mean, the theme of this conference, renaturing ourselves, it applies on there's many levels of having that conversation. But to me, it's a really big deal that we're constantly in this pollution field of frequency and understanding the implications of that for your children, for your plants, for your animals, for yourself, and working to clean that up and bring yourself back and your environment back into that coherent state of nature that we evolved in is a really important piece of this puzzle, which I don't know that is being sufficiently discussed. What just one more thing I think you said at the beginning was the satellites, and maybe you're talking about um, what's it called? Um, the Tesla, not the SARS
Oh, SpaceX, the satellite mega
Starlink.
constellations. Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, I've heard people talk about how much 5G is being projected down onto the planet through Starlink and things like that. Do you want to talk about that as well and where that sits in the
Sure.
level of order of impact and its effect on clouds and its effect on water vapors ability to make clouds and that's
Yeah,
effect on
yeah.
and
Heavily involved in
you
that
want to think about
area.
that?
There's a website. It's mentioned in the PowerPoint. The Balance Group, thebalancegroup.net, and again, there's a
Yeah.
link to it. So the only federal case of any federal government we brought, I founded the Balance Group as well, and there's a book about this as well, which I'll talk about, titled "The Urgent Need for Regulation of Satellite Megaconstellations" by Scott Millwood, and he's along with the University of Leiden and the University of Paris and affiliations with the European Space Agency have taken up some of the work we published in this federal case and also in the Balance Group on this subject. So, a few ways to think about it. One is the first satellite ever launched was Sputnik in 1957. And the Russians, the Soviet, then Soviet Union, launched it and flew over the United States. And there was a huge panic that they were going to rain down nuclear bombs and da da da, and huge panic about it, and that spurred the U.S. space race and NASA and going to the moon and all that. However, up until about 4 years ago, Dan, in the history of humanity, from Sputnik to about 4 years ago, only 10,000 satellites in the history of all humanity, all governments, all corporations, scientists of any sort, had only launched about 10,000 satellites, of which about 3,000 were operating at the time. The rest had burned up in the atmosphere and things like that. Elon Musk, world's richest man, Jeff Bezos, world's second richest man, about 4 or 5 years ago, were given, kind of out of the blue, licenses each for 40,000 satellites. Again, in the history of humanity, only 10,000 been launched, of which 3,000 were operating. They'd been each given licenses for 40,000 for what are called mega constellations.
Yeah.
Also, Musk wanted to have his mega constellation operating at about 1,500 kilometers from Earth, 1,500 kilometers, whereas Sputnik and many satellite systems were 30,000, way out there. They were way out there, but he wanted to be much closer. And then he filed he called it an amendment. He wanted to go from 1,500 kilometers to 500 kilometers from Earth. And I saw that, and we called the Federal Communications Commission and said, because the commission just approved it, like out of the blue. We're like, there's a process. You can't just approve. You can't go to, within a day. And they said, oh yeah, we made a mistake. We'll put it on notice and comment. Quite the mistake. Anyway, we filed in that notice and comment proceeding, and they ultimately said, we're going to let this system get deployed. We sued in federal court. Ultimately, that suit, they said we didn't have standing, even though we were representing over 1,000 astronomers and many other environmental groups, which was bunk. But we didn't have, at the time, we didn't have the resources to keep suing. But we would have continued to keep suing. But we did get a Government Accountability Office report published, type of ruling. I don't know if you know about the GAO, the Government Accountability Office, but they had the FCC publish on its letterhead saying they would start looking much more closely at these impacts that were, the exact impacts we were talking about in the Balance Group filing. And this is all in this book by Scott Millwood, again, affiliated with the European Space Agency and the Universities of Leiden and Paris. And I'll put that book in the bibliography as well, and you'll see that in the PDF. And there's a few things going on there. One is ask the same questions. Is this insured? What if thousands of satellites catastrophically start hitting other satellites. And there's something called the Kessler effect, like dominoes.
Yeah,
All the
yeah, yeah.
satellites can get knocked out. You know how reliant we are on satellites, by the way? You
I,
know, GPS, your plane landing, most people don't even know how to navigate anymore. 10, 15 years
yeah,
ago, you had a map or you knew where you were going. And gasoline doesn't pump often because there's what are called VSATs, very small aperture terminal satellite systems that when you swipe the card, it doesn't go through the wireline network, it goes through a satellite network. You might have noticed all 5G phones are already pre-fitted for satellite connectivity. And sometimes if you're on an airplane or in a rural area, you'll see a satellite signal asking if you want to be connected to the satellite network. These mega constellations make AT&T and Verizon look like a tiny little corner candy store in terms of the size and scope and the amount of radiation we're being hit with. Also, there's a variety of other aspects that we put in the filing and are on the Balance Group website. One, there are all kinds of living entities from whales to sea turtles, to butterflies, to beetles, to birds, to salmon, who navigate uh, uh, via the
yeah,
electromagnetic spectrum. We all have, including humans, we all have a part in our brain, type of magnetite in our brain that literally
right,
can
right.
read RF spectrum. And of
Yeah,
course, that's why there's a certain type of bird that can hide 30,000 seeds in a square kilometer around here in the fall, fly to South America for the winter, fly back and find all 30,000 seeds. Why does a salmon, I was talking about stronghold, and this book
yeah,
talks a lot about it. How can a salmon, a little spawnling, leave a particular river in the middle of nowhere in Russia or in Bristol Bay, Alaska, and find its way back after swimming all over the world to that exact spot? How do they know? Turtles that go back to their nesting grounds and on and on and on. And this all gets disrupted. And there's already studies that show disruption. Um, there are people, you can do this if you go to a dark sky location, and there's a dark sky association which talks about a lot about the light pollution. You can lay on your back just in a field, somewhere you don't have to go to a specific location, but any semi-rural field. And if you look
yeah.
really carefully at night, you'll see the satellites tracking across the sky.
You can
All
see
right.
the size of a star, and they move.
Yeah,
Yep, you can 100%
exactly right.
see them. Yeah,
That's exactly right. And what is
yeah,
that doing to migration? Almost always is tied to propagation, right? Migration is tied to propagation. Life forms migrate to spawn, to breed, to survive. To get from harsh climates to better climates, spring, summer, birds fly south for the winter,
yeah,
blah 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 blah. All that. What is the impact? Where are the serious studies before authorizing all this? Where is the insurance against those harms to our economy, to our health, let alone the satellite falling out of the sky, let alone the chemicals on these satellites, let alone the collision effects? By the way, this is on the Balance Group website. When Starlink was first launched, there was a front page New York Times article. Um, some of them started burning up and colliding. So again, they weren't all, thousands weren't deployed yet, but it showed some problems. They're kind of seat of the pantsing it. That's one way to do science, trial and error. But why are we the guinea pigs? Why is this? And we put this in the legal filing. It's called the people pay principle. If you're uninsured against massive harm, against the largest network ever built in the history of humankind, make no mistake, it's the largest network ever built in the history of humankind. Why aren't you insured? What does that mean when you're not insured? You know, this has far reaching impacts, right?
yeah,
And why aren't there peer reviewed studies on harms to flora, fauna, to humans? Da, da, da.
yeah,
What does it mean when your phone never turns off and is always talking? If you're out of range, it's now talking to a satellite. What does that mean to your radiation exposure? It's not just the satellite coming down, it's your phone blasting up or your neighbor's phone or whatever. On and on
yeah,
and on and on. Love that
yeah.
question.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, these are all things I don't want to leave people after 12 weeks of 11 weeks of inspiration with a 12th week of depression. But uh, I feel like I'm afraid that's what's happening here. Maybe people just sort of can want to plug their ears. But, you know, if we're talking about growing high quality food, healthy plants, not even talking about our children, which are also very important, but working with nature, like these are ambient stressors that exist in our environments. And I think a lot of people might just feel completely overwhelmed and like depressed and like, woe is us, what can we do? So, again, for me, like things people can do for their immediate bioregions, ways they can take responsibility for a little bubble of property of land that they are, have tenure on, are the things I'm trying to suss out here. And what I think I hear you saying is kind of hard. There's stuff you've heard of, but there's not really anything you can do to sort of proactively create a coherence bubble in your immediate bioregion. Um, I guess I maybe call it wishful thinking. Had wanted you to be able to direct us to a place or a theory or a strategy or a practice or a material or a product or something that could do that, project coherence. Maybe that's, is it wishful thinking? Is it not? Is
It's
the only way to shut these things down systemically?
I think I love the question, and let's see if I can parse it a few different ways to think about it. I'm much more optimistic than that
Good.
for a variety of reasons. Sort of
I don't
like
want to leave you with depression.
sort of
Yeah.
like what you're doing with all the great work at the Bionutrient Food Association, right? Food, you're an athlete of what's happening to our food, but you're also an athlete of a solution, right?
Yeah.
And in the same realm, these different organizations that are listed are tackling these issues from their areas of expertise, and they fit together like a Lego. Click, 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 click.
Yeah.
They fit together into a coherent way to come about this. One is, why aren't we better than Switzerland? They're 3% of the U.S. current U.S. power. Why don't we go down to 1%? There's that.
Yeah.
So that's being attacked. We're winning we've won a federal case. We got a remand. Well, you have a remand. They're supposed to study that. So that's underway. For example, there's private cases where people have been say they've been injured, they've gotten cancer or intracerebral hemorrhages, and those have been advancing. So there's that on that level, that meta level. Another meta level is what you asked is, what can I do today in my house? And there's a long list of things you can do, whether you're in an urban house or exurban or rural or whatever. Long list of things you do. And then your personal hygiene, your personal RF hygiene, and the schools. I'm on the board of two schools that, you can't have your phone on in school. Some
Yeah.
schools, I visited a school in Fort Scott, Kansas, St. Martin's. It's a expellable offense if you bring a phone. You know, just like it used to be an expellable or is an expellable offense if you bring. Again, think about what this does chemically to
God.
people. If you
Yeah.
bring a gun or heroin to school,
Yeah.
you're out of
Yeah.
here.
Drugs.
You know, and again, there were controlled substances in our foods back then, in our medicines. It was, it's a wild west. So humanity has a way of, Teddy Roosevelt did this back then. It's the same playbook in a sense. The car industry didn't want to compete on safety until they discovered by competing on safety it can be useful, but they're not looking at the RF part of it. So we're pushing that. There are things in motion that are designed to ruthlessly solve. The Friends of the Ecosystem Restoration Movement, and the ecosystem restoration communities. There's 80 communities around the planet where people self-organize. Now they're mostly they're more in the crunchy area about, or like WOOF, the World Organization of Organic Farms, or
Organic farms.
that
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of stuff. But I'm literally on a lot of these boards, and I'm running literally some of these, and very involved with saying, and they're very, very interested. These people are, these are people who want a healthy environment. And
Yeah.
once you make the invisible visible, once you make the invisible visible, once people are aware, then you can't unring that bell, right? And so the
That's
more
why I'm
people,
having you. Yeah.
yeah, and I love, and then I love the whole thing you're doing with the scanning of the apples and the
Yeah.
avocados and the whole bit. I love it to pieces because that's another piece of ecosystem restoration, right? When I was in law school in the late '80s, graduated in 1990 in DC. I had a house in Tacoma Park, Maryland, with a bunch of knucklehead buddies, but there was a farmers market in Tacoma Park. There were 30 different apples. You could all kinds of gorgeous apples. Now you go to, again, it's a lovely community. It's all about nature. There's maybe five different apples. They're all, So what happened, and what was the nutrient quality of those apples? And I track a guy in North Carolina. I think he has he's kept the DNA from 8,000 different apple trees. Wouldn't it be amazing to get a grad student or somebody down there with your bionutrient food scanner and like finding the most nutritious apples, and like it might be a lost or many lost apple strains, and bring them back because again, going back to competing on safety, also in a safe way, realize that giant food or AMP food or Walmart food or whatever, go down the list, had a more nutrient, satisfying apple, competing on safety. Same thing with the wireless industry. Once the animalistic forces come of capitalism, it kind of cleans itself up in a way, and that's what we're maniacally focusing on in these areas.
Oh, yeah.
Real estate values. When you have a home that's being hit by RF, and let's say it's an identical home, same builder, same suburbs, the other,
Yeah.
half a mile away, and the west edge, you're on the east edge or whatever. Um, if the tower's near you, you're typically, there's a lot of
Property
hard
value
data.
goes down.
Your property
Yeah.
value goes down. That's a real economic harm. And
Yeah.
then, property owners, property developers down the list, they're like, it's sort of like lead paint. You don't want it, right? Sort of like those things. So I'm quite optimistic we're gonna take these have a big, wide, welcoming off ramp for unsafe practices and a big, wide, welcoming on ramp for safe practices. That's the whole idea of the ecosystem restoration movement writ large, for RF, for screen addiction, go down the blah, 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 for bringing in trees, old growth trees, which
Yeah.
propagate the propagators. Find your local champion trees. We have a tree school at the Tree
Yeah.
Archive, teaching people how to do that. An RF school for environmental health trust, the library program where people can go and get a grant, take it home, and then walk into that Apple store or walk into the developer saying, I was going to tell my friends to buy in this neighborhood, but we're not going to buy because you got all these towers going up. We're going to buy at your competitor.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. Very
Brilliant.
optimistic that stuff has worked historically. It sort of answers at the test in that sense.
Yeah, great. Love that. Love that answer. All right. I've been spending too much time asking you questions and not asking the questions of the people who have been submitting them. Although I think I've been covering them broadly, but I'll try to cover a couple here and we'll see if we can just, cover them. We've got only 8 minutes left in our allocated time. Mindy says, does shielding the home and sleeping areas also further reduce natural earth harmonics we need to be exposed to for health? Does shielding the home and sleeping areas also further reduce the natural earth harmonics we need to be exposed to for health?
Yeah, I love that question. I'm not the scientist. We have
Yeah.
top scientists and doctors on our board at the Environmental Health Trust, for example. And there are plenty of studies. And again, the Art Angel Ancient Tree Archive, and I did publish that on their science page, about 14 pages of research about when you're in the natural environment, because I love her question. When you're in the natural environment, you're exposed to forests and fields that are naturally occurring. There are all kinds of replete with health benefits. So the premise of her question is, well, hey, if we're shielding from the polarized waveforms, the artificial, human generated, human system generated, are we also canceling out, natural magnetic fields, natural, pheromones that are issued by an elm tree that if you had your window open, that kind of
I
thing.
think she's talking about the grounding energy of the land.
And the grounding
Okay.
energy, yeah, all of the above. And I think the short answer is yes. It needs to be studied when we're putting ourselves in a hermetic spot. You know, just like the overuse of the hand sanitizer. Then people realize you need some sort of
You
biology around
actually,
you.
a sophisticated microbiome is a really powerful defense mechanism.
That's
And
right.
engaging in genocide on your hand is not necessarily beneficial. Yeah.
Boom.
Chanya says, do these RFID blocking pocket protectors really offer protection? I think that you kind of said no to that.
Yeah, yeah. Those are, they can block signals, but then you have to be really wary. How does the signal get out, and is it pointed at you or your kid when you put that thing on? So what we're really pushing for is to get a standardized way to do these measurements in an institute, and I have a lab here that can do that, and there's other groups. And I think we need to, like United Laboratories. You go and buy a microwave or a washing machine. There's a yellow ticket that says exactly how much power it uses. It's all standardized. When you buy a new car, there's a ticket that, if it's a Chevy or a Ford or a Toyota, it's the same ticket on the window, the new car that has objective measures. And that's what we need to get at with these devices, objective measures through a independent third party, high quality system. And we are focused on that. Isn't there yet. It's too new, but we are writ large. When I say we, the communities I've been talking about are working on
Yeah.
that.
And anybody here who hears this, even now or later, you've left a bunch of breadcrumbs for organizations that are where people are coming together to work on this in a proactive fashion. And I hope that leaves people feeling at least somewhat empowered if they want to do something. Um, yeah. Doug says, are there similar standards in place that can be used to legally address the construction of solar farms for power generation and the transmission of that power in urban areas?
Yeah, so I'll key off a few things, and there's much more research to dive into. But short answer is yes. There's other countries that have different sets of standards, power generation, RF off of power, OSHA standards, OSHA requirements for whether you're installing electrical or telecom systems, signage that's required. We're not seeing. I think my personal view is most of the signage that we should be seeing around, when they put a system, right around the corner from you, or whether it's a big solar generation plant or it's a little 5G thing the size of a dorm refrigerator outside your window, or a transformer, which is electrical versus telecom. Um, are they doing the proper measurements that are required by the OSHA standard? And all this is on my NSMA presentations, on the nsma.org website from 2019 to present. If you go to the Competing on Safety presentations and things like that, you'll
Yeah.
see the signage that's required. And are they doing it? And can you go after folks on that? Yes, yes, yes. And can you measure? Yes. And can you ask them, have they been measuring to meet certain emission requirements? And if they haven't, because often these power generation systems have telecom on them to manage them, and they're required to have telecom on them. And are they following that as well? On and on and on. We could do a whole thing on just that question alone. We could do a whole thing.
As with many of these presentations, we're just opening up a can of worms, and there's all kinds of rabbit holes that now people can see that, oh my God, and how about this, and how about this? Um, Mindy, quickly, what to look for when purchasing land to reduce exposure in regards to distance from towers and antennas, airport radar, etc.
So I love that question. So there is an FCC database for where towers are, official database. It's, not the easiest thing to find, but it's there, tower locators. And also where there's something called the ULS, the FCC's database, a second database, not just the tower database, but the uniform licensing system, where all spectrum licenses are kept, and you can search them geographically and see, is there something in this area where I'm potentially going to buy, or already do live. That's one area. You can also NSMA, the National Spectrum Managers Association. Those are the spectrum managers. They're spectrum coordinators who, for a job, help you find that kind of stuff. They do it for big companies. They can do it for somebody buying property. They can do it for anyone. So
Yeah.
those are different tools to have. And EHT eventually will publish probably a frequently asked question chart about how to do this kind of on the easy, because
Yeah.
we want to make it easy. Like, what if you were talking to some sixth graders and gave them a 10-minute course? That's what we're going to start publishing a lot at EHT. NSMA gets into the more sophisticated realm of it, but
Yeah.
the more accessible realm. All this needs FAQs. I just became their president very recently, a couple of months ago. So we're look for by early next year, there'll be a lot of FAQs and ways to any big issue on real estate value, how to measure, how to do this, how to do that. All these questions. There's a lot of data already, a ton of data there, but we're also sharpening it and launching a lot more data. And think of like Montessori schools teaching this, Girl Scout
Yeah.
badges teaching this. Think of that kind of stuff as well. Really
Yeah.
getting accessible. And I firmly believe once we make the invisible visible, make the invisible visible, once people really get what's going on, they'll be much less likely to put up with it. And they're elected representatives as well. They have kids too, or relatives or neighbors or whatever.
Yeah.
So.
Brilliant. Well, I mean, we're in our last minute. I think that might have been a wonderful way to end. But any final comments before we call it a day?
Just sort of onward, Excelsior. There's a lot to be done. Love to have this conversation. Love to learn more about what you're doing in the context of spectrum management as well, with the food, and you maybe apply it to ancient trees and things like that. We could have that discation. I think there's a
Love to
lot
work
to be
with
done.
ancient trees, our biological principles. We could really help them out,
Yeah.
and the new ones in their production, in their growth.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
be good fun, and so much
All
more to
right.
do. And yeah, there's a lot coming out, and as I mentioned, like the human RF and flora and fauna project as well, RF signature project, that kind of thing. We should all know what our RF signature is. It exists. It's measurable.
That was
Uh,
so That's so important. if we can actually read our energy fields,
Yeah.
which is what you're telling us, that we
Yeah.
each have a unique energy field and it can be measured and things can be learned by proper assessment of it. And there are tools out there now. I mean,
Yeah.
we went right over that one, but that's a
Yeah.
massive bomb just dropped.
Yeah, that was, and that this is
So
not new.
exciting.
Professor Harold Saxonburg from Yale in the 30s and 40s pioneered this area, and
Yeah.
I'm just taking it up to apply it to modern radio spectrum analyzers and antenna probes, and to systemize it and standardize it. So much like that sheet on the side of the car, you'll have a sheet that shows this is how Dan operates. This is the channels he operates on. So
Here's where he's holding this trauma.
yeah, that's right. That's right.
It's FAQ when you're getting married to somebody. You can read their energy field, see what
Yeah,
actually is
I'm
going on.
incompatible here. What's going on? Yeah.
Thank you
We've
for all of your work. Thank
Yeah,
you for
you
all of your
got it.
work, Joe. It's so brilliant. You got your fingers in so many important pots, and you're just like full steam ahead. I really appreciate everything you're doing, and I really appreciate you being on our stage.
I
So,
appreciate what you're doing. Love the joy of it, and look
yeah,
forward to talking more. If get you maybe get you on some of our programs as well. Have a little fun. So,
brilliant. All right. Thank you very much, and thank you
peace.
all.